Welcome back, everybody. This is Days of Noah number 32, and these lectures just seem to keep going and going and going. So today, let's do a quick review. In the last lecture, we've been discussing how David had hired these Phoenician Canaanites, the Sidonians, to come into Israel and build his royal palace. Now he should have never done this. God clearly instructed the Israelites to not mix with these people. But David had it in his mind that he needed to have a large royal palace. These were the only people around who had the skill set to build such a structure because they were the true original stone masons and Freemasons of antiquity. Now, after he had this royal palace built, he began to feel guilty. And he decided that he wanted to build the Lord a special house to put the Ark of the Covenant in. However, as we reviewed last time, the Lord essentially rebuked David and said that he's never asked any Israelites to build him a house made of cedar. And in fact, the Lord made it clear that he would be the one who would build David a house, and that this house would bring about peace and righteousness to Zion forever. Now, of course, on the back side of the cross, we have the luxury of understanding that this was a Messianic prophecy of the coming of the Messiah, the promised one, the anointed one, Jesus Christ, who we know comes from the, quote, house of David. That's in reference to this genetic lineage of David, this kingship of David. Now, in David's defense, he didn't have the knowledge that we have, so he misinterpreted the prophecy, and maybe that was God's will all along. I don't know, but nonetheless, David misinterpreted the prophecy. He thought that the Messianic prophecy of Jesus was actually a prophecy about his literal biological heir who was just being born at that time. And since the prophecy was about this man who's going to bring peace, David naturally said, well, okay, this is about my son, so let's name him Peace or Shalom, which is where we get the word Solomon. So even Solomon's name, if truth be told, was an incorrect name based on a misinterpreted prophecy. Now, from there, we see that David begins to obsess on this temple. It just must not have sat right with him that it was in his mind to build a house for the Lord, and the Lord told him, no, you're not going to build it. Because from that moment on, David begins to acquire and store everything you can think of for this temple. All the raw materials from gold and silver, bronze, iron, marble, timber, precious stones, etc. And he also procured an extremely large labor force of foreigners, these masons and stone cutters who drive from Tyre, who are all the Canaanites. And then we see 3 times in Scripture where it reveals that David exhausted himself right up to the point of his death with making all of the preparations for the temple, down to every single detail, where it'll be, who's going to build it, how they're going to build it, what they're going to use to build it, and on and on. Now, this week, as I was doing some Bible study, the Lord has graciously brought me to another verse to confirm this Messianic prophecy. And it's in Zechariah 6. And I haven't been in the book of Zechariah in a long time, and I just stumbled onto this verse. But as soon as I read it, I knew immediately that it was a confirmation of this teaching about David misinterpreting this prophecy. So Zechariah 6:12 says, then speak to him, saying, thus says the Lord of hosts, saying, behold, the man whose name is the branch, notice how the word branch is capitalized, from his place he shall branch out, and he shall build the temple of the Lord. Yes, he shall build the temple of the Lord, he shall bear the glory, and he shall sit and rule on his throne, and so he shall be a priest on his throne, and the counsel of peace shall be between them both. Now this, once again, is definitely a reference to Jesus. This is a Messianic prophecy about the Prince of Peace who's going to come at a later time and build the temple of the Lord. And so this is a confirmation that when David received the rebuking from God about building the literal temple, and that rather God was going to build him a house, that this house was really this throne here, this priesthood and this throne that the Messiah would sit on to bring eternal peace. Now we know that Scripture is always referring to Jesus as the branch. He's the tree of life. He comes from the root of Jesse. And so whenever you see the word branch, that's a certainty that we're talking about the Messiah. So moving forward, last time we also reviewed Ezekiel 28, which is a fascinating text. It describes how Lucifer, or Satan, was the overriding principality that was actually governing the nation of Tyre, and that how Satan was working through the king of Tyre, King Hiram. And we see that Satan was working through Hiram to manipulate David and Solomon through flattery and merchandise. We also learned that Lucifer, before the fall in heaven, was a covering cherubim, and that he was on the mountain of God in the holy sanctuary of heaven, the holy tabernacle, and he was most likely anointed, and he was wearing the ephod, that similar to what the high priests wear, that have the precious stones on their chest. And his job was to cover and protect the heavenly Ark of the Covenant. And then somehow he began to traffic and trade merchandise. And the text says that it was through this traffic and trading of merchandise that brought about his iniquity, and through his pride and vanity he was cast out of heaven. So that's a very interesting situation, because we see that all play out again on earth. And so we're seeing that the things on earth are shadows of things that have happened in heaven. So it's interesting how we see Lucifer, or Satan, work through human agents such as King Hiram to repeat this entire manifestation on earth, because the Phoenicians, the Canaanites, become these amazing traffickers of merchandise. They're the maritime people who travel all around the Mediterranean area, swapping out and trafficking merchandise to the known world. And it was through this specific merchandise that they were able to get into David and Solomon's life and manipulate them. And last time we reviewed this account of Jesus, which I think puts this account into a whole new light, that when Jesus is coming in for the Passover, and he's coming into King Solomon's temple, and he sees the Pharisees and the Sadducees they have this big lucrative business where they're peddling merchandise of all these animals for gold and silver, that Jesus becomes extremely angry, and he actually says, "Don't make my father's house a house of merchandise." And he overturns the money changers. So this is essentially like a repeat or a shadow of what happened in heaven with Lucifer. So it's just really a fascinating account. Now, I also said in the last lecture that even though God didn't sanction the building of this temple, he would still go on to bless it. And there are verses in there where Solomon really gets on his knees and he pours out his heart to God and asks him to bless the temple. And so God continues to bless Solomon and the temple, and he gives him a concession. And God has done this multiple times in the scripture. He did it with a monarchy. And we still are going to review that in the upcoming lectures when we get into the royal bloodlines. God never wanted or planned for there to be a kingship or a monarchy in Israel. But he conceded to the people's desires. Same thing with divorce. Same thing with polygamy. Same thing with eating meat. There's many accounts in the Old Testament where once mankind starts going down a certain pathway, God concedes. He gives them concessions, and he continues to bless them even though it wasn't the original plan. Now we see that Solomon's appetite for all this merchandise that Hiram and the Phoenicians are bringing him, it got so large that at one point he even begins to leverage and mortgage off a part of Israel by giving King Hiram 20 cities in Galilee, which is really an insane thought that the king of Israel would actually sell off a large portion of the Holy Land to the Canaanites, to the seed of the serpent. And that gives you some perspective of just how far down the wrong path Solomon had gone. And it's then when we start seeing these verses that Solomon received 666 talents of gold through the acquisition of merchandise, that we start putting things into perspective and go, okay, wait a sec. 666 talents of gold, that clearly has to be related to the book of Revelations and the mark of the beast. And we know in the mark of the beast that you can't buy, trade, or sell merchandise unless you receive the mark. And we know that Mystery Babylon in the book of Revelations is responsible for peddling all of the Babylonian ideology around the world. And so there's just a lot of deep parallelism there that hopefully as time goes on, we'll begin to receive more understanding and revelation on. Now it's about this time that we see Solomon begin to pursue pagan women with all of his concubines, and he goes on to build them a bunch of altars across the nation of Israel. And let's review that quickly. 1 Kings 11. But King Solomon loved many strange women, together with the daughter of Pharaoh, the Moabites, the Ammonites, the Edomites, the Zidonians, and the Hittites, of the nations concerning which the Lord said unto Israel, you shall not go into them, neither shall they come into you, for surely they'll turn away your heart after God. But Solomon clave unto these in love. Verse 3, and he had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines, and his wives turned away his heart. For it came to pass that when Solomon was old, that his wives turned away his heart after other gods, and his heart was not perfect for the Lord his God, just like his father David was. For Solomon went after Ashtaroth, so that Ashtaroth is of the Zidonians, after Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. Milcom is just another word for Moloch. And Solomon did evil in the sight of the Lord, and he went not fully after the Lord. And then Solomon built high places for Chemosh, the god of the Moabites, in the hill that's before Jerusalem. So right there in front of Jerusalem, in front of the city of Jerusalem, he built an altar to Chemosh and for Moloch, the abomination of the children of Ammon. See here, Molech is from the children of Ammon. And then up here, Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. Same thing, Milcom, Moloch. And likewise did he for all his strange wives. Now think about that. He had 700 wives. So he did it for all of them. He built hundreds of altars for all of his wives and burnt incense and sacrificed to their gods. Now we don't know exactly what they sacrificed, but again, this week, the Lord was gracious enough to bring me some more verses that shed light on it. Psalm 106 is the entire psalm is about God liberating the Israelites, bringing them out of the Exodus, taking them through the Red Sea, bringing them into the land of Canaan, and then them turning against him and going after the god Baal of the Canaanites. And which is what Solomon is. Solomon's the one who led them there. And let's read what they did. The Israelites joined themselves also to Baal of Peor. They did not destroy the people concerning whom the Lord had commanded them. See, when you read the accounts, when they go into the land of Canaan and they are given the promised land, God tells them you have to wipe out every man, woman, child, an animal of all of these Nephilim groups. It's not because he's some kind of misogynistic, genocidal, maniacal God. Because these aren't human beings made after, these are not Adamites. These are Nephilim fallen angelic hybrids. And God has told them, wipe them all out. But what does it say in verse 34? They did not destroy the people whom the Lord had commanded them, but instead they did the opposite. They mingled with the Gentiles and learned their works. That's insane. They actually mixed with the Gentiles and learned their works. So now we're mixing the DNA. The seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent are being blended. And you know what? A little leaven ruins the whole batch. Once you throw some fallen DNA into the human genome, it's real hard to get it back. Notice the word Gentiles too, because the word Gentiles is just another reference to the Canaanites. Verse 36, and they served their idols, which became a snare to them. They even sacrificed their sons and their daughters to demons, and they shed innocent blood, the blood of their sons and daughters, whom they sacrificed to the idols of Canaan. There it is. We're being told it's the Canaanites. And the land was polluted with blood. So I'm telling you now, when this is what Solomon got into. It pains me to believe that he could have done this, but he went full line sinker to the dark side, and he began to create altars and do sacrifices to Molech, just like it says up here. And as we're going to continue to read, the only sacrifice that works for Baal and Moloch is human sacrifice. Continuing on, verse 39, they were defiled by their own works, they played the harlot, therefore the wrath of the Lord was kindled against them, so that he abhorred his inheritance, and he gave them into the hand of the Gentiles, and those who hated them ruled over them, and their enemies oppressed them. And we know that Nebuchadnezzar and those come in and destroy them and take them later. And they were brought into subjection under their hand. Many times he delivered them, but they rebelled in their counsel and were brought low for their iniquity. All right, the book of Jeremiah. They have built also the high places of Baal to burn their sons with fire for burnt offerings unto Baal, which I commanded them not to do. So high places of Baal. And what did Solomon do up here? It says up here that he built, verse 7 right here, Solomon built high places to Chemosh and for Molech, and he sacrificed and did burnt incense to him. So it's the same thing, because Baal and Moloch are the same thing. Jeremiah 32, they built the high places of Baal that are in the valley of Ben Hinnom to cause their sons and their daughters to pass through the fire to who? Molech. See, Baal and Molech are the same. Baal means Lord, Molech means king. They're two different words referencing Hercules, and they're calling him Lord and King, which I have not commanded them to do, nor did it enter into my mind that they should do this abomination to cause Judah to sin. So I think it's safe to say that Solomon is the one, once he adopted all of this stuff through Hiram and started hanging out with these pagan women, they turned his heart from the Lord. He instituted all the high places, all the altars to all the false gods, and began doing the sacrifices. And this is what leads to child sacrifice in the nation of Israel. Solomon did that. Here, if you read an excerpt from the Biblical Encyclopedia regarding Hercules, here they say that Hercules, written like this in the Greek, Hercules is mentioned in the second Maccabees as the Tyrian god to whom the Jewish high priest Jason sent a religious embassy with the offering of 300 drachma of silver. That this Tyrian Hercules is the same as the Tyrian Baal is evident from a bilingual Phoenician inscription found in Malta. This inscription was described by Gesenius, in which the Phoenicians' words, to our Lord Melkarth, the Baal of Tyre, are represented by the Greek word right here. See, it's the same thing, which is Hercules. Moreover, Hercules and Astarte are mentioned together by Josephus just in the same manner as Baal and Ashtoreth were in the Old Testament. The Tyrian Hercules was also known as Melkarth, Baal, Adonis, and Moloch or Molech. Even Pliny the Elder, who was a famous historian, testified that human sacrifices were offered up every year to the Carthaginian Hercules, which coincided with what was stated of Baal in Jeremiah 19 and with the acknowledged worship of Molech. So what does all that mean? It means that we see that there's a lot of historians who have all tied this together. Melkart, Baal, Moloch, and Hercules are all the same entity. Okay? They're all the same entity, and human sacrifice is what was done to them. We have many non-biblical references that reveal that, and now we have many biblical verses that confirm that. And this is all out of the, in my opinion, this was all born out of inviting these people into the nation of Israel to build this temple that God never wanted. And when you read history, there's so many interesting details. Like, for example, they're talking about the Carthaginian Hercules. If you remember Hannibal of Carthage, he was the great ruler who, invaded all of the Mediterranean area. Well, Hannibal, his name ends in B-E-L. If you study him out, he was a Canaanite who served Baal or Hercules. And so history is full of these stories. So last time we also reviewed that God was the one who charged Moses with making the original tent or tabernacle according to the pattern in heaven that God had showed him on the mountain. Multiple verses in the book of Revelations revealed that the temple in heaven was a tabernacle or a tent. Never once in Scripture do we see anything that suggests that there were two pillars that were part of God's original design. We discussed that the tabernacle was really typology and foreshadowing of this New Testament tabernacle that Paul spoke about frequently, which is the human body which houses the Holy Spirit. The true house of David is the coming of the Messiah, who would serve as the cornerstone for the New Testament temple that was being built, in which each member of the body of Christ is a living stone being knitted together to form the spiritual temple. We also reviewed the book of Ecclesiastes, in which Solomon revealed the errors of his life. Here Solomon realized that his ambition and his desire for wisdom and power are what led to his folly. All of his earthly accomplishments did not give him the peace that he thought they would. He says it was all vanity. Solomon even confesses that the women in his life became a net that ensnared him. This was more bitter for him than death. He admonishes us to enjoy the wife that the Lord has given us instead of having meaningless relationships. His final words in Ecclesiastes 12, "Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God shall bring everything into judgment with every secret thing, whether it be good or whether it be evil." So that's a very important lesson for us to receive. Lastly, we reviewed some of Solomon's proverbs that he had wrote when he was younger, and how God was admonishing him to stay on the path. And Solomon wrote the words such as, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction." He also said things like, "Do not be wise in your own eyes, but fear the Lord and depart from evil, and that the Lord's wisdom is better than silver and gold." And despite all this, Solomon still, even though God poured all this wisdom and knowledge into him, and he wrote all these beautiful words, which was inspired by the Holy Spirit, he still fell into the snare, and it was because of the flesh. He was just given so much stuff and women and money, and we see this today, with rich and famous people. It can be a real trap. Lastly, we revealed how the Phoenicians worshipped Hercules, and they built two pillars with the royal arch, and they placed these all over the Mediterranean area. We reviewed that they put them in Greece and Italy and the southern tip of Spain and Gibraltar, the pillars of Gibraltar and that whole region. They slapped up these Herculean pillars everywhere. And it was evident that when Solomon asked King Hiram for his most skillful mason to come and build the temple, that Hiram sent his #1 guy, Master Mason Hiram, named after the king. And it was this master mason Hiram who used his own creative authority that given to him by Solomon, and he's the one who built the temple, and naturally he chose to include the pillars of Hercules from his homeland. That can't be any more obvious. It says right in the text that he was this master builder of bronze and gold from Tyre. And so he'd spent his life learning the secret trades of the Masons, and all they did for all those years was build these pillars all over the civilized world. So he had to have knowledge of those pillars. He had to. Let's review the text again. Then Solomon determined to build a temple for the name of the Lord and a royal house for himself. And Solomon sent to the king of Tyre, saying, as you dealt with David, send him cedars to build himself a house, so deal with me. Therefore send me at once a man skillful to work in gold and silver, bronze and iron, crimson and blue, who has skill to engrave with the skillful men who are with me in Judah. Now remember, these are the smiths, the engravers who go all the way back to Tubal-Cain, who is the wicked, seventh generation from Cain. This is the seed of the serpent. They're the ones who learned the eternal secrets from heaven and applied them in all of the evil ways. Also send me cedars and cypress from Lebanon, and I know that your servants have skill to cut the timbers in Lebanon, and my servants will be with your servants. This is the blending of the people, to prepare timber for me for the temple which I'm about to build, which will be great and wonderful. And indeed, I will give to your servant the woodsmen who cut timber. Then King Hiram of Tyre answered in writing and said, now I have sent a skillful man endowed with understanding, Hiram, my master craftsman. This is the guy. We're going to focus on him the rest of the lecture. The son of the woman of the daughter of Dan, and his father was a man of Tyre. That means that he was a hybrid. He had an Israeli mother, right? He had a Hebrew mother, and he had a Canaanite father. Now, how did that happen? It's obvious. When David started blending the two people groups, he obviously brought over a skilled master craftsman from Tyre, and that's who built his royal palace. And all those years that he was there, he began having relationships with the women, and he ended up getting one of the Israelite women pregnant, and then she produced this half Tyrian and half Hebrew master craftsman Hiram. And so he was skilled to work in all of these different things, and it says here he can make any engraving and to accomplish any plan which may be given to him with your skillful men and with the men of David your father, and we will cut from Israel. Verse 17, then Solomon numbered all the aliens who were in the land, and it was 150,000. So this is just proof right here of exactly what we've been saying. When you mix the two people groups, they're going to start having illicit relationships with each other, and you're going to be blending the genetics of the people. And we see an example of that right here. Now, it's obvious that King Hiram sent his best guy. I mean, this was one of the biggest building projects in the world at that time. There's no way that King Hiram's going to send one of his mediocre craftsmen. He sends his number one guy, and this guy has spent his entire life becoming endowed with understanding of the master masonship. And that master masonship, by the way, includes witchcraft, sorcery, sacred geometry, and all the other things that we see in witchcraft. And we're going to get into all of that at a later time. And so he didn't just come over to Israel and just bring his building architectural skills, but he also brought the ways of the secret societies of the Masons, of which he belonged to. It's also important to realize that he was from one of the daughters of Dan. And we're going to get into that later because the Antichrist, we believe, comes from Dan. And that's connecting this tribe to the seed of the serpent. Now listen, there are going to be people who still struggle with this whole teaching on Solomon and the temple, and that really King Solomon's temple has the pillars of Hercules, which are pagan pillars, and on and on and on. And so if we were in a courtroom and we had to provide the burden of proof, the phraseology that they use is, if we can bring a level of proof that is beyond a reasonable doubt, then that means that it's likely to be true. And so at this point in time, the listeners are like the jury. You're the ones who are listening to the information, and I am the prosecutor, and I'm trying to prosecute Solomon and Hiram, and so these are the facts. Fact number one: the Phoenicians ruled the entire Mediterranean region during the era of David and Solomon. They were the maritime people who ran that entire area. Okay, that's a fact. Fact number two: we have a lot of historians that I've already revealed in previous lectures, at least 4, who testify that it was customary for the Phoenicians to erect the 2 pillars of Hercules in all of the regions that they colonized. It was their trademark. This is what they did. Okay, that's a fact. Fact number 3: we are certain that King David and King Solomon hired this same group of people, the Phoenicians, to come into the nation of Israel and build their holy sacred temple to God. That's also a fact that's undeniable. Fact number 4, 1 Kings 7 states that Hiram, the master craftsman mason from Tyre and Sidon, is the one who designed and built the 2 pillars of Solomon. Fact number 5, when we review the Old Testament tabernacle, there is no mention of these 2 pillars, and it is apparent that they were not part of the original design that Moses was shown according to the pattern that he saw on the mountain. That is a fact. So the conclusion that we can draw is that the master mason Hiram is the one responsible for the addition of the 2 pillars of Hercules that we see in King Solomon's temple. He had grown up and spent his entire life in the nation of Tyre. He spent his entire life learning how to manipulate all the metals and the wood and the gold and so forth. And he had spent his entire life learning how to build things like the pillars and the sacred royal arch and all of that. And that's why he was the one chosen to come to Israel and to help Solomon build the temple. And all he did is take all of his secret trademarks that he learned growing up, and he applied that to the front of Solomon's temple and put the pillars of Hercules there. And so that's the truth that I'm revealing and standing on now. I believe that we have brought it beyond a reasonable doubt that what I've said is true. And so it'll be up to the rest of you to make your own determination. Now, this man, Denon Ishbarat, has some interesting things to say about the Masonic religion. The Masonic usage of the terms Jachin and Boaz originates from the biblical account of King Solomon's temple. The master builder of the Temple of Solomon is known as Hiram Abiff, a prominent figure in Masonic rituals. The account of Solomon's temple is of great importance in all Freemasonry, as each detail of the building holds important esoteric meaning. The 2 pillars act as a portal to the mysteries by standing on each side of the entrance to the sacred place. Now, according to many ancient rabbis, especially if you read the Babylonian Talmud, they say that Solomon was an initiate of the mystery schools, and that the temple which he built was actually a house of initiation containing a mass of pagan, philosophic, and phallic emblems. The pomegranates, the palm-headed columns, the pillars before the door, and the arrangement of the chambers and draperies all indicate the temple to have been patterned after the sanctuaries of Egypt and Atlantis. There is some truth to this. I mean, I'm not making this claim. This is what the Jewish rabbis who study in Kabbalah and Jewish mysticism and who are part of the Babylonian Talmudic system, They believe that Solomon was part of the mystery schools, and they believe that all of these things here. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. I know that he falls into idolatry later on, and so I think that he does become part of these pagan philosophical mystery schools. There's no doubt about that, because once Solomon starts worshiping all these gods, he is the one who adopts the six-pointed star, which is the star that becomes the star for witchcraft, and that's the star that we see on the flag of Israel today, and we're going to get into that symbolism. They call that the Star of David, but it's very matter-of-factly really the seal of Solomon. And there's a lot of people that will argue that, but those people have not done the research. And we're going to reveal that as we move on. The next 2, 3, 4 lectures, we're going to continue to nail down the fact that that star on the flag of Israel is not the Star of David. That is the seal of Solomon that comes from all of these mystery schools and from these Phoenician Canaanites. They're the ones who brought that star. And we'll get into that later, but for now we're just going to continue to discuss these pillars of Hercules. So let's see what Albert Pike, one of the world's famous 33rd degree Freemasons, has to say. Now, he's wrote a lot of books, like the book Morals and Dogma, and he's published a lot of information about the secret writings of the Masons. Notice he has a double-headed phoenix on his chest. He's got the 33 with the pyramid because of all the Egyptology. And we're going to get into some of the Egyptology here in a minute. But this is what he has to say. For this reason, Jachin and Boaz are prominently featured on all Masonic buildings, monuments, and documents. Here is Albert Pike's description of the pillars in a text intended for new Masons. Quote, "You enter the Masonic lodge between two columns. They represent the two which stood in the porch of the temple on each side of the great eastern gateway. These pillars of bronze were, according to the most authentic account that in the first and the second book of Kings, confirmed in Jeremiah, 18 cubits high with a capital 5 cubits high. The capitals were enriched by pomegranates of bronze, covered by bronze network, and ornamented with wreaths of bronze, and appear to have imitated the shape of the seed vessel of the lotus or Egyptian lily, a sacred symbol to the Hindus and Egyptians. These columns were imitations by Hiram, the Tyrian artist, of the great columns consecrated to the winds and fire at the entrance to the famous temple of Malkarth Hercules in the city of Tyre." So there it is. I've spent the last 3 lectures proving and revealing all of these things regarding the Phoenicians. And now we're reading one of the most famous 33rd degree Freemasons' writings right here. That they're saying here that it's obvious that the columns were imitations by Hiram, the one that we just read in 1 Kings 7, who was the widow's son, who was the half Tyrian, half Hebrew, and that these great columns were consecrated to the winds and the fire at the entrance of the famous temple of Hercules in the city of Tyre. It is customary in the Masonic lodges of the York Rite to see a celestial globe on one and a terrestrial globe on the other, but these are not warranted. If the object be to imitate the original 2 columns of the temple, the symbolic meaning of these columns we shall leave for the present unexplained, only adding that entered apprentices keep their working tools in the column Jachin, and given you the etymology and literal meaning of the 2 names. The word Jachin means he that strengthens. The word Boaz means strong, powerful, and mighty, or a fort. So this guy pretty much confirms in his secret writings. Here's one of his books. Here is Moral and Dogma. You see the double-headed phoenix, which has always been one of the royal symbols of the seed of the serpent of the Phoenician Canaanites. I already revealed that in the previous lecture. So, what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to prove that these Masons are a nefarious group of people that they can be tied back to the Phoenician Canaanites, and they're part of the seed of the serpent going all the way back to Cain, and they are going to be the ones who help bring about the New World Order and the last days beast system. And so here is their symbolism, and this is some of their writings. Now this is where things start getting a little bit confusing, so just hang with me. But we just read that Albert Pike, one of the greatest 33rd degree Freemasons, said that the pomegranates, the wreaths, the pillars, that all of that come from Tyre, that they also are connected to the Hindus of India and the Egyptians. And so now I want to get into that a little bit. This is a historian here, Bibi Dev Misra, who has been studying Indian culture for a long time, and there's some ancient manuscripts written by the historians Megasthenes and Arion, and there's a book called Indica, and this is what they say. Arion and Megasthenes say that Hercules, the Hercules who penetrated so far, the Indians tell us, was actually a native of their country, India. He is particularly worshipped by the Saraceni, who have two great cities, and the navigable river Jobaris passes through their territories. This Hercules, and the Indians themselves assure us, uses the same habit with the Theban Hercules of Greece. So now we're starting to see that this god Baal, Melkor, Moloch, Hercules, he's got all these different names. We're starting to see that he actually branches out all the way over to India. Many scholars believe that Hercules mentioned by Megasthenes and Arion is the same as the Indian deity Krishna and his elder twin brother Balarama, who are still worshipped in India today. Now that's really interesting because we've already studied Krishna and Shiva and Eastern mysticism. They're the ones who brought about transcendental meditation, how to open yourself up to the spirit realm. They're the ones who brought about the Kundalini spirit. We saw all of the symbolism in the Theosophical Society, and so now we're finding that there's a connection between this deity Krishna and Hercules. And it's interesting how we know that in Tyre and Sidon, Hercules' name is Baal, and now we're seeing over in India that his twin brother is Balarama, and it has the word Baal in it, so there's that connects. He goes on to say the parallels are quite remarkable. The Greek historian Diodorus Siculus also connected the Grecian Hercules to the Indian Balarama. Hercules was born amongst the Indians, and like the Greeks, they furnished him with a club and a lion's hide. In strength he exceeded all men, and he cleared the sea and the land of monsters and wild beasts. There's no doubt we're talking about the same one that we all heard of, the demigod Hercules, who's half human, half God. He comes from Olympia. He's the same one that comes from the Genesis 6 conspiracy. And now we're finding in ancient writings by both Megasthenes, Arion, and this historian Diodorus Siculus that this demigod Hercules, they're saying, comes from India, and he is the same one as the Grecian Hercules. The Roman philosopher Cicero says, the Indian Hercules is the same as Baalus. See there? All Baalus is Tyre. So Tyre and Phoenicia, they called him Baal, B-A-A-L, which is anything that ends in A-L has a Semitic is of a Semitic language. But then the Greeks called him Baalus because everything in Greek ends in O-S, U-S, or E-S. So Baalus is just the Grecian Hellenized version of Baal. And now we're learning that the Indian Hercules is Baalus, and he used the term Hercules Baalus to refer to him. Captain Francis Wilford wrote in the Asiatic Researchers that this Baalus was none other than Balarama, the twin brother of Krishna. The Indian Hercules, according to Cicero, was Baalus. He is the same with Bala, the brother of Krishna, and both are worshipped at Mutra. Indeed, they are considered as one avatara or incarnation of Vishnu. He's also called Balarama, or Bala sprung from Vishnu, or Hari. He is certainly Hercula, Hercules, and Hercules. So this is pretty wild because now what we're seeing is that first we said that Baal or Moloch of the Bible, where they were sacrificing children to the Canaanite gods of Baal and Moloch, that was really the same. Baal and Moloch are just other words for Hercules, the demigod that the Greeks referred to. Well, now we're finding out that it goes back even further, that the same god Hercules that the Greeks are talking about, or who they refer to as Baal, is actually comes from right here. Hercules or Hercules comes from India, and he is the avatar Krishna. And so, and I can see it here with the words Hercules. I mean, we've all heard the words like Hare Krishna and Harry Carey, that someone's going to commit Harry Carey or Harry Kiri means they're going to commit suicide. So they're saying that the words Hercules comes from India. Indian historian James Todd wrote a book titled Annals and Antiquities of Rajasthan, in which he states, how invaluable such remnants of the ancient race of Hercules, how refreshing to the mind yet to discover, amidst the ruins of the Yamuna, Hercules, god of strength, retaining his club and his lion's hide, standing on the pedestal at Baldeo and being worshipped. This was the name given to a large tract of country around Mathura, the ancient capital founded at Sirasua, the grandfather of the Indian brother deities Krishna and Baldeva, also known as Apollo and Hercules. The title implies the attributes of god of strength. Both are lords of the race Kula of Hercules or Hercules, of which the Greeks have made the compound Hercules. So, that was a mouthful, but basically what I was trying to demonstrate here is that there's a lot of people from this Megasthenes, Arian, the Greek historian Diodorus Siculus, we have Cicero, Captain Francis Wilford, even James Todd, who've all confirmed that the Eastern gods, Krishna, Vishnu, Balarama, are just different names for the Greek gods Hercules, which are just different names for the Phoenician gods of Baal and Moloch, and now we're going to find that those are all just different names of the Egyptian gods. They're all the same entity, they just have different names and different cultures, and they all come after this Hercules. And if we trace Hercules back, we find a common source before the flood, the Genesis 6 conspiracy. What did it say in Genesis 6? The fallen angels made with human women, and they made these giant mythological men of renown, these famous men. And then after the flood, these famous mythological men are moved into all these different cultures and take on all these different mythological stories, but they all have one common source. And now we're seeing through all these ancient writings, we're confirming that. So these are the Indian gods, the avatars Krishna and his twin brother Balarama, and we've learned now that they're really just Hindu versions of the Greek Hercules or the Phoenician Baal. And it doesn't stop there. These same gods end up migrating into Egypt, and I'm finally beginning to really understand why Egyptology is so enshrouded into the Masonic religion. And it's because that this god Hercules, the demigod Hercules, who we now know is the same thing as Baal and Moloch in the Bible, who we now know is the same thing as Vishnu and Krishna and Balarama in India, is the same thing as these Egyptian gods that we're about to review. This same researcher here, he wrote an article called Hercules Balarama and the Institution of Kingship in Ancient Egypt. And this will be kind of merging back into these royal bloodlines of the Illuminati and the seed of the serpent. But Herodotus, who we've already reviewed in the past, had written of the Theban Hercules during his travels to Egypt. He says that the Egyptian Hercules, look at there, even Egypt has their own version of Hercules as one of their ancient gods. He noted that the Egyptians who lived in Thebes and worshipped the Amun depict Amun with the face of a ram. Every year at the festival of Opet, the Egyptians will slay a ram and strip off its fleece and cover it with a statue of that god as he once covered himself, and then they bring it up to the statue or the image of Hercules. So even Hercules goes all the way into Egypt. When this has to be done, the whole assembly beat their breasts to the ram, and afterwards they bury him in a holy sepulchre. And that's not really shocking to me, because when you look at the map here, I mean, we know that this is where Tyre and Sidon are. They're putting up the pillars of Hercules all through this area. We said in the previous lecture that they sailed over here into this Greek island. They put up pillars of Hercules here. We have pillars of Hercules in Greece. They've found pillars of Hercules in Italy. We talked about how they put up so many pillars of Hercules down here in Spain that it's even on the currency all the way up to today, and that's where the dollar symbol comes from. They even named the Straits of Gibraltar the Pillars of Hercules. So these Phoenicians colonized this entire area. Well, they didn't just go north, they went south too. They colonized all of Egypt, and they put up the Pillars of Hercules here. They put them up in Libya. They found them in Morocco. So it's not shocking that this god Hercules has made his way down into Egypt, the same one that made his way over into India. So the yearly festival of Opet is dedicated to the Egyptian gods, this triad of gods, Amun, Khonsu, and Mut. But since the Theban Hercules was an integral part of this festival, as mentioned by Herodotus, most scholars agree that Khonsu, this lunar god Khonsu, is the same deity as Hercules. There was, in fact, an ancient Greek tradition which identified Hercules with Khonsu, and Herodotus has also actually referred to Khonsu as Hercules-Khonsu. So there you go. Even the Egyptian god Khonsu ends up being Hercules. Herodotus mentioned that he had visited the temple of Hercules in the ancient Egyptian port city of Herculeon. So Hercules was so famous in Egypt that they actually made a city called Herculeon, and they had an Egyptian temple built to him. But as we're going to see, it got destroyed by it got covered in water. This great temple had been built where Hercules had first set foot on Egypt. The temple had been visited by Helena and Paris before the Trojan War. More than 4 centuries after Herodotus' visit to Egypt in the 5th century BC, the Greek geographer Strabo had observed that the city of Hercules, which possessed the temple of Hercules, was located to the east of the branch of the river Nile. So what's really fascinating is they finally discovered this city archaeologically. We're going to look at that in just a second. So what's really interesting is that this city of Herculeon, also known as Thonis, and I think what makes all this research so stinking tough is that you've got all these different names for the same person. I mean, every city has multiple names. See, all the cities have 2 names, all the gods have different names, but we're talking about the same place. So Herculeon is the Egyptian name for where Hercules settled Egypt, but the Greeks called it Thonis, Thonis. And it had reached its peak around the 6th century BC when it was the primary port of entry to Egypt for all ships coming from the Greek world. So once again, these Phoenicians, these maritime people, they would sail into the port of Thonis or Hercules, where they put up these pillars to Hercules. But eventually, the entire city was covered by the ocean due to floods and earthquakes. Now, could that have been Noah's flood that covered it? Who knows? I have no idea. In 2001, the French marine archaeologist Frank Gaudiot discovered the submerged ruins of Herculeon, nearly 6.5 kilometers off the coast. They found a temple complex dedicated to Amun and to Hercules Khonsu, and among the many fascinating sculptures and inscriptions recovered was an imposing shrine in pink granite which belonged to the temple of Hercules Khonsu. Isn't that fascinating? And these are actual literal pictures of it. And what do you see but none other than the pharaohs of Egypt? So, we're going to find out that this demigod Hercules, which we could trace all the way back to Genesis 6, this Nephilim hybrid is the same God who ended up discovering Egypt and starting all of the Egyptian dynasties there. And we've even found some of the ancient cities of Hercules and some of the ancient relics of the pillars of Hercules. It's pretty amazing. And so the ancient city of Thonis Hercules was discovered after being submerged for thousands of years underwater. Notice how they have this great big huge monument underwater. So Apollodorus tells us that Belus ruled Egypt and his twin brother ruled over Tyre and Sidon. These are both thought to be Baal and Hercules. Okay, so Belus is just the Hellenized version of Baal, B-A-A-L. They added a U-S to it, Belus. We know that's Hercules. And Belus had two sons, Egyptus, also known as Ramses, and Danaus. This Egyptus, look at the word Egyptus. This is where we would get the word Egypt. He would go on to be the founder of Egypt, and Danaus would be the founder of Libya. The 10th century writer Suidas, who compiled the Encyclopedia of the Ancient Mediterranean World known as the Pseudo-Lexicon, wrote that Egypt derived its name from Egyptus, the son of Belus, who we know as Hercules. Now, this word Egyptus is also, his other name is Ramses. Remember, they always have two names. Ramses, this is coming straight from the Pseudo-Lexicon, written 10th century BCE. Ramses, the son of Belus, who was the son of Zeus, came into the region called Mysteria, or ancient Egypt, and he gained the sovereignty over the people. He was the person who they afterwards called Egyptus. Now, this is interesting because we're going to see Ramses pop up in the Bible in a minute. Another interesting perspective concerns the twin brothers of Belus called Agenor, who ruled Tyre and Sidon. According to German philosopher or philologist Philip Karl Buttmann, the genuine Phoenician name of Agenor was Cana. The Phoenicians, who were of several peoples, belonged to the Canaanite subgroup of Semitic people, trace their origins back to Cana or Canaan, after whom the land of Canaan is named. In fact, the Greeks also used the term Cana for Canaan, while the Egyptians referred to this region as the land of Canaan. Now we know that Balarama had a younger brother called Krishna, and they were literally twins. One of the very popular names of Krishna was Kanya, which sounds very similar to the Phoenician Cana. In fact, the name Kanya is widely used in India today, and in many families the elder brother is often called Bala, which is almost the same as Baal, and the younger is called Kanya. Therefore, the twin brothers Belus and Kanya can be recognized as counterparts of Balarama and Krishna. So this is just another guy who's confirming that these gods in India, the blue avatar gods in India, are the same thing as the Phoenician gods, which are the same thing as the Egyptian gods. They're all the same thing. So, Hercules is Baal, is Belus, who they say Belus had two twin sons, Egyptus and Danaus, and that they are recognized as Krishna and Balarama. And then the other thing we can take from this is that Hercules was the father of Egyptus, also known as Ramses, who would start the royal Egyptian dynastic bloodline of the pharaohs. This is what this author had to say. Baal, who's also known as Melkort, who's also known as Belus, was also known as Hercules. We're talking of a single person of extraordinary abilities, Hercules Balarama, who had roamed the earth thousands of years ago and carried out many incredible acts of heroism, because of which he was deified and became known to symbolize strength and fertility and kingship. Everywhere he went, he built massive fortified cities and grand palaces with the royal arches of Hercules. He started royal dynasties or bloodlines, and he instituted laws and customs related to religion and astrology and astronomy. So this is the demigod that we're talking about. Everything that the book of Enoch said about how these Nephilim, how these fallen angels revealed all the eternal secrets of heaven. They produced these great big huge demigods. These were the men of myth, the men of renown. They went all over the earth, teaching all of humanity everything about religion and astrology and astronomy. And they were the ones who were the big, huge giants who put up all the ancient megalithic stone structures and became the masons of antiquity. These are all this. We're talking about the same thing here. This person, Hercules, was a native of India, as attested by Greek historians. He was the brother of Krishna. Orientalist Thomas Maurice wrote in the Indian Antiquities that the Indian Hercules, therefore, is the god king Balis, is the true prototype of him who was worshipped at Tyre, and he was the great promoter of commerce and navigation, of him who was adorned as the vanquisher of Busiris in Egypt, of, in short, whose complicated history was in after ages adopted by the fabulous Greeks. So there's another historian who confirms this. They go on to say that it was in Egypt, however, where Hercules played an extremely significant role. As per the ancient sources, he had deposed a tyrant named Busiris, and then he set up his son Ramses on the throne of Egypt, and thereby kick-started a new phase in Egyptian history. Now we're going to get into this because this is what the Bible talks about, right? We know that the Israelites were slaves in Egypt. His appearance on the earth sometime around 4000 BC corresponds to the pre-dynastic period of Egypt. He had subsequently also traveled to Babylon, where he set up an order of priesthood. Unlike those in Egypt, he founded the magnificent city of Babylon, and he established a royal dynasty that ruled for thousands of years. After his death, he was deified by the Hebrews and the Canaanites as the god Baal and the tutelary deity of Babylon. Like Hercules, Baal was regarded as a protector and conqueror, and his sacred symbols were also the club and the pillar. So, all of the ancient mystery schools that go all the way back through Egypt, Babylon, all come back before the flood, and they are all shrouded in the Nephilim, the demigods, and essentially the most famous one is Hercules, who would go on to be all these different gods that we've talked about today. The author goes on to say, in Egypt, it was where Hercules played an extremely important role. In this article, I will attempt to show that through an analysis of the regalia of the pharaohs, that all through the dynastic period, the Egyptian pharaohs were simply trying to imitate Hercules Bellerama, the great hero who had established the foundations of the institution of kingship in ancient Egypt, going all the way back to the pre-dynastic times around 4000 BC. This is before the flood. The traditional historical accounts indicated that Hercules had arrived in Egypt during the pre-dynastic period around 4000 BC, and that he stopped the flood on the Nile. He killed the tyrant Busiris, and he placed his son Ramses as king there. And it was King Ramses who began the pharaoh, the dynastic succession of the pharaohs, and a new form of kingship, priesthood, and culture. An analysis of the royal regalia of the Egyptian pharaohs indicates that the Egyptian king was imitating Hercules by incorporating virtually all of the symbolic attributes associated with the legendary hero of Hercules, which include the scepter, the mace, the crook, the flail, the white crown of the Upper Egypt, the false beard, and even the lion's tail, all can be traced back to Hercules. So what he's essentially saying here is that Hercules, who I've connected to be the demigod who goes all the way back to Genesis 6, the Nephilim, that it was this Hercules who basically settled the area of Egypt, and it was his son who started the Egyptian royal bloodlines of the pharaohs, and that all of the pharaohs were just trying to replicate the ancient god Hercules. He goes on to say it's also possible to identify the deified pre-dynastic king of the Nile, Anagia, as the person whom the Greek historians have identified as Hercules or Balis. He was also depicted with symbols of the pharaoh, and he resembled Hercules in his representations. And so he goes on to say that they're all the same thing, that all of these gods are the same thing. So Hercules had a tremendous impact on the institution of kingship in Egypt. He also influenced all the other areas of Egyptian life, including priesthood, religion, military, astrology, etc. So, again, just because it's so confusing, the Bible is right. The fallen angels came down in Genesis 6 before the flood, thousands of years ago. They took on flesh, and they slept with the daughters of men, and they created the ancient mythological hybrid human giants known as the Nephilim. These Nephilim would later become known as the demigods. One of these Nephilim, one of the most famous ones, is Hercules. He's been living on from infamy from the beginning of recorded time, even through today. And it's this demigod Hercules who would become the same god as Baal or Baalis to the Phoenicians. He would become Krishna and Balarama to the Indians. He would become Khonsu and some of the Egyptian gods. These Nephilim gods are the ones who brought about the philosophy of astrology, astronomy, religion, this ancient pagan royal priesthood, the secret societies that come all the way to today. This is the source of all of it. And we know that Hercules had a son, Ramses. Now let's put that in context of the Bible. Genesis 47. This is going back to Genesis. Joseph placed his father and his brother, and he gave them a possession in the land of Egypt, in the best of the land, in the land of Ramses, as the Pharaoh had commanded. Exodus 1. Therefore they did set over them taskmasters to afflict them with burdens. And the Israelites built for Pharaoh many cities, including Ramses. Why do you think that is? Because it was named after the first major Pharaoh, Ramses. If you look up that word, Strong's Concordance, Ramses means a child of the sun, and it's in reference to a city built by the Hebrew slaves in Goshen, named after the ancient Egyptian Pharaoh Ramses. So we now know. So that was a lot to say, those last 5 slides. All of that was basically to say this. The Egyptian royal bloodlines, or the Egyptian royal dynasties of the pharaohs, can be traced back to Hercules, who is a hybrid that comes from the Genesis 6 contamination from the seed of the serpent and the fallen angels. And we've even discovered the city of Herculeon, where they pulled out all the ancient pillars to Hercules and all the ancient shrines to him. And what is it but none other than the symbols of Pharaoh? They look identical to what we see of Pharaoh. So there you go. So now that we've nailed that down, let's get back to the Freemasons. Let's get back to what happened with the temple, and let's get back to what's referred to as the widow's son. So we know that Solomon asked for a skillful man, and we know that King Hiram sent the master mason, Hiram, who is as it says here in verse 14, the son of a widow. Okay? And he's a man of Tyre, and he was this great bronze worker. He's the one who cast the 2 pillars of bronze, and he's the one who named the pillars, and he put them up in Solomon's temple, which we've now proven were the pillars of Hercules. Notice these symbols down here. These are just some modern day symbols in memory of Hiram Abiff, the widow's son. And we see the compass and the square for Freemasonry. Same thing here, in memory of Hiram Abiff, the widow's son. We see the compass. And notice the skull and crossbones in both of them, which represent death, by the way. Same thing here, set to the craft. You know, the craft is the master craftsman, or the craft of Freemasonry, is really the same thing as the craft of witchcraft. That's where the word craft is alluding to. Both witchcraft and the Masonic craft are the same religion, I'm afraid, but in memory of Hiram Abiff, the widow's son. See, we're going to find out that they idolize this guy. This guy, Hiram, the widow's son, who's the hybrid Hebrew Tyrian, he becomes the Masonic Christ, if you will. So now I want to start focusing on the mythos around this guy from the Bible, Hiram, the master mason. Cryptic Masonry is the second part of the York Rite system of Masonic degrees, and the last found within the Rite that deals specifically with what they refer to as the Hiramic legend. These are all the legends of Hiram. These degrees are the gateway to temple restoration rituals, or the Second Temple legend. Hiram Abiff, also known as the widow's son, is the central character of an allegory presented to all candidates during the third degree of Freemasonry. Hiram is presented as the chief architect of King Solomon's temple, and we got that from the Bible. What we did not get from the Bible is in Freemasonry they teach that this Hiram that the king sent over was murdered in the temple that he designed by 3 ruffians as they unsuccessfully attempt to force him to divulge the master mason's secrets, including passwords. So according to Masonic legend, these masons, going all the way back to the days of the Phoenicians, had all kinds of secrets, including passwords, and that there were 3 ruffians, Canaanites, who wanted Master Mason Hiram to divulge the secrets. And according to the legend, he didn't do it, so they killed him. The tale of Hiram Abiff, as passed down in Masonic lodges, underpins the third degree. It starts with his appointment by Solomon as the chief architect and master mason of the construction of the temple. As the temple is nearing its completion, 3 fellow craft masons from the workforce ambush him as he leaves the building, demanding to know the secrets of the mason. Hiram is challenged by each in turn, and at each refusal to divulge the information, the assailants strike him with a mason's tool. He's injured by the first 2 assailants and struck dead by the last. Eventually, other master masons find the body. Supposedly, the secrets of the master mason and the passwords were preserved by Solomon, who ordered them to be buried under the temple, inscribed on Hiram's grave. This becomes the beginning of temple lore and the legends, which revolve around the concept of the life, death, and resurrection of Hiram Abiff. So, we don't know how much of this is true. What we know is that Solomon asked the king Hiram of Tyre to send me your best guy. And King Hiram said, no problem. I'm going to send over a half Hebrew, half Tyrian, who is our master mason, named after me. His name is Hiram, and he's going to come, and we know that he built the temple, and we know that he put the pillars of Hercules in front of Solomon's temple. Now, what the Bible does not discuss at all is the rest of this legend about Hiram Abiff, who has all these secrets and the secret passwords, and how 3 of his fellow craftsmen end up murdering him, and somehow the secrets are passed down to Solomon and preserved by Solomon. So that's all just legend and folklore, and maybe it's true, maybe it's not, we don't know. But this is what a lot of this is where the beginning of the Hiramic legend begins, is that this guy Hiram Abiff ends up becoming almost deified, if you will, in that it's his life, death, and ultimately the resurrection of Hiram Abiff that a lot of the Mason talk about, and a lot of their secret initiations revolve around. Now they'll claim that they're Christ followers, but you will never, ever, ever, ever see anything to do with Jesus Christ, ever, within the Masonic religion. You'll see everything to do with the Bible, with Solomon's temple, with Hiram Abiff, but you will not see anything to do with Christ. And we'll start looking at their symbolism and trying to connect the dots. Now, the most important thing that I want to display to you now is that somehow we see these blurred lines between Tubal-Cain, which goes way back before the building of Solomon's temple, all the way back to Genesis 4, and this Hiram Abiff. And the reason why we're going to see connectivity between these 2 characters is because of the point that I've been making for the last 5 lectures. The seed of the serpent can be traced all the way back through the Canaanites. Hiram Abiff was part of the seed of the serpent. He comes from the line of the Smiths, and they can be traced all the way back to Tubal-Cain, who can be traced back to Cain. And you see, these Masons, they understand this. They know about this seed line, and I'll prove that through their symbolism. Number 1, If you look over here to the right, you'll see this stained glass window, the same thing that we'll see in many Christian churches, only it's usually Jesus Christ who's being glorified. But in this situation, it says right here, Hiram, right? So this is Hiram right here. Notice he's standing in between the two pillars, Jachin and Boaz. Why? Because it was his idea to build those pillars there. Solomon never charged Hiram with doing it. Hiram had creative license to do what he wanted with the front of the temple, and naturally, since he was from Tyre and he was used to building the pillars of Hercules, that's exactly what he did. Also, you see the checkerboard floor. We'll get into that in a little bit. We see that in all Masonic symbolism. On the top of Jachin and Boaz, we see the two angels, okay? They're supposedly, protecting this whole situation. And then I don't think it's a coincidence that Hiram is holding a picture of the building, and in this situation, it's a cross. It's actually an upside down cross if you look at it close enough, but that may be me just reading into the symbolism. But the real part that I'm most fascinated with is right here where it says Hiram, architecture and artificer, right there. You say, well, big deal. He was an architectural person. He was a mason. So what do you care if it says artificer on there? And the reason why is that word artificer is an important word that's only used one time in the entire Bible from cover to cover, and that's in Genesis 4:2 when talking about none other than Tubal-Cain. It says right here in Genesis 4:22 that Zillah bare Tubal-Cain, an instructor of every artificer of brass and iron. This word artificer means to be a master craftsman in terms of metal, brass, and iron. It's only used this one time, okay? And now we're seeing the same word being applied to Hiram because they're clearly trying to show this lineage. Hiram was a master craftsman of gold and bronze and silver, and so was his great, 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 great paternal grandfather going back many generations, Tubal-Cain. This is why the Masons have so much lore around Tubal-Cain, like the symbol right here. Tubal-Cain, one of the symbols that we've reviewed in the past is they put a cane right here with two balls around it, and that represents Tubal-Cain or Tubal-Cain. And over time, that symbolism slowly merged into a 007, which is where we get the mythos around James Bond and the 007. And I've said time and time again that the symbolism is the most important thing to look at. That they can camouflage their ideologies with Christian phraseology and things like that, but the symbols and the pictures they give you the most accurate knowledge. So, here we see this is a picture of Hiram Abiff. He's clearly the one who's designing the temple, okay? It wasn't Solomon who designed it, it was Hiram Abiff who designed it. Here's another image of Hiram Abiff, and he's using the actual compass here to draw out the plans for the temple. And then over here is another rendition of the situation. This is supposed to represent, I believe, one of these is the king, Solomon. I'm not sure if that's him there. The other one is supposed to be Hiram Abiff. And here you can see there's a little altar here with the Masonic symbol on the front and the checkerboard floor. And this is supposed to represent the period of time where Hiram Abiff is building the plans for the temple. Now, where we get this checkered board here comes from 1 Kings 7, when it talks about Hiram Abiff was the one who built the two pillars, and then it says that he used in verse 17, and nets of checker work and wreaths of chain work for the chapters were upon the top of the pillars. And so when you look up these words, nets of checker work, what the Strong says is that it is a reticulated ornament to the pillar, a checker or lattice. So if you Google checker right now, this is the image you'll get, like a checkerboard, if you ever played checkers before. If you Google lattice, this is what you'll get right here. Same thing, a checkerboard. And so they use this in King Solomon's temple. Hiram is the one who put this design inside of King Solomon's temple, And so naturally, if you study Masonic symbolism, here's a picture of the Masons. They've got the pillars in the back, naturally. They've got the checkerboard floor with a five-pointed star. Same thing here. This is a Masonic temple here. We've got the two pillars of Hercules. We see the Masonic symbol in the back. We've got the checkered board floor. This is after the design of King Solomon's temple. Here you can see even one of the ties that has a Masonic symbol. Black, white, black, white, black, white. So that's where the checkered concept comes from. Now the reason that's important is because you'll see it all over Hollywood. You'll see it in the music industry. Anytime you see these actresses and musicians who are playing on the background of a checkered floor, then the majority of the time that has to do with the whole Illuminati, Masonic, bloodline, New World Order symbolism that they have enshrouded. You can see it here in I Pet Goat. You can see it in the Roman Catholic Church. Most of the floors in many of the places are checkered. You go, oh, well, that's just a coincidence. Is it really? Is it really a coincidence that they decided to put checkered floors everywhere? I mean, this goes all the way back to Solomon's temple that was designed by the Phoenician pagan Canaanites. And we see it through all their symbolism that the checkered floor is part of their symbols. And it just amazes me how the symbolism carries on to today. This is a fashion show that took place in Europe. And just look at the symbolism. I mean, they went to great deals to try and reproduce all this. You've got the two pillars of Hercules. You've got the Masonic symbol right here. Here's the compass. Here's the square, the hammer, and everything that you use to build it. In the middle, you see the angel wings. The fallen angels are the ones who have been responsible for this whole thing. You have a five-pointed star that's called a pentagram. On top of that is the sun, which they're sun worshippers, and it's shaped in a six-pointed symbol, which is sacred geometry. Down below, you see the six-pointed star with an all-seeing eye in the middle of it, which we see on the flag of Israel, and that's the seal of Solomon. We'll get into that later. We see the infinity signs. We see these royal flag emblems on the side. These people, these strangely dressed people who are wearing all the bizarre outfits are walking on a checkered floor, and people are wearing checkered outfits. And you think, man, why is this still manifesting 2,500 years later? And the answer is there's a supernatural spirit that's working in all of these secular atheists to reproduce and bring about the pre-flood era. The era of the fallen angels and the Nephilim are going to return in the last days, I assure you. All of this is not by coincidence. The white and the black on the shoes, the black shirt with the white polka dots, the dualism, the white shoes here and the black shoes here. I mean, the way this guy's dressed here, black and white. Somebody went to great details to try and capture all of these symbols. And there's going to be some naive person out there that says, oh, they just did it for fun. Or, look, they went to great lengths to reproduce this. Why? Because there's a spirit working through them that's trying to illuminate to the rest of the world and prepare us subliminally for what's coming. And whenever you look at a lot of the modern renditions of this story, I think that there's some real subtleties there that show you who is running the show. Images like this right here, this is obviously King Solomon here with a crown, but in his ear is someone whispering, right? And you see that it is Hiram Abiff. And if you look real close right there, there is the symbol of there's the Masonic symbol on his hat, and he's holding the square. And he's whispering in Solomon's ear, saying, hey, I've got a plan for the temple, because he was the mastermind of the temple. Same thing up here. I don't know if this is Solomon here or this is Solomon, but this is probably Hiram Abiff. He's the one who's doing the designing. Same thing over here. This is a Masonic picture of Hiram Abiff. He's drawing the top of the pillar. He's the one who's got the square, and he's producing the base of the columns. He's the mastermind holding the shovel here. And then here in the middle, once again, Hiram, the artificer. And they mention 1 Kings, but that word artificer is never used in 1 Kings. That word is used many, many chapters earlier when referring to Tubal-Cain, the master craftsman. And so again, this is supposed to be Hiram. And what is he doing? He's the one who's drawing out the plans to the temple. He has the schematics and the architectural design. And so this is where we really begin to see all of this lore of Hiram, that Hiram becomes deified and glorified. And even today, there are tons of motorcycle groups. There's tons of different chapters. Up here on the top left, the Sons of Hiram, the Riding Club, and we see the Masonic symbol here. It's a motorcycle club. Hiram's Scottish Riders. What do you see? A double-headed eagle. We know what that is now. That's really from the Phoenicians this guy Hiram was a Phoenician, right? And one of their symbols is the phoenix, the double-headed phoenix. Over here on the right, you've got a five-pointed sacred geometry symbol, and then in the middle, we see the compass and the square. Notice the six-pointed star. That's the hexagram, and it says Masonic biker written on it. And then inside of the compass, you have an eyeball. And then, of course, in the middle of that, you see the skull, and it says nomads. You go, what does that have to do with anything? Well, we know that the Masonic religion can be traced all the way back to Cain and Tubal-Cain. Cain was the first original nomad. He was the one who moved out into the land of the nomads in the city of Nod and was the first Mason who began to erect walls and build the first city. And so they're showing their heritage going all the way back to that point. Same thing down here. Sons of Solomon, motorcycle club. And you see the skull. You know, why is there so many skulls in all the symbolism? The skull represents death, by the way, obviously. Here you see another motorcycle club, Stolen Souls. And you see the compass in the square. You see the skull in the middle, and then the rays of illumination coming out, kind of like we see on the all-seeing eye. Same thing over here. This is another motorcycle gang in Canada, Ontario, the Widow's Son. That would be after Hiram. What do we see? We see a pyramid facing up for the Egyptology. We see the all-seeing eye in the middle. We see the sun at the top with the rays of illumination because they're all sun worshippers. We see the angel wings because we know that the fallen angels have coordinated this whole thing. And so there are many modern day versions of this still going on today. And once again, in memory of Hiram Abiff, the widow's son, and in memory of Hiram Abiff, the widow's son, in memory of Hiram Abiff, the widow's son, three skulls, once again, very common. Here's one of the diagrams of the initiation. This person is laying down, brethren kneeling at prayer around the grave of Hiram Abiff, the widow's son. And what you begin to realize is that all of Masonic lore of the entire religion is based on this guy Hiram, who is a Phoenician Canaanite Nephilim seed of the serpent. And that is who they worship. They do not worship Jesus Christ. Same thing here. Here is a big statue of Hiram. Here's the plumb line and that he uses to build. And then he's holding the compass in the square right there. Now I thought this was an interesting rendition here. This is a rendition here where they are supposedly in King Solomon Temple. Notice that you have big pillars everywhere. We have big pillars here with the Royal Arch of Scottish Freemasonry. Within it, what do we notice? These are the three ruffians who are going to attack and kill King Hiram. And we see one guy here is holding a compass, the other guy's holding a mallet, and they plan on killing King Hiram, or excuse me, not King Hiram, but the master craftsman Hiram. And then over here, what are they doing? They're going to go out and bury his body underneath the temple. And this is where all the folklore comes from. But notice what's really interesting about this rendition. Notice what's in the background. You have a rotunda dome with a big giant obelisk. Does that look familiar? It should, because if you look up here on the top, here in Tyre, we see the Royal Arch with all the pillars. This is the triumphal arch of Baal or Hercules and the pillars of Hercules. Later, those same concepts get put into the Vatican City that we see right here. This dome and this the obelisk, the Egyptian obelisk, which we know traces back all the way to the land of Phoenicia and was originally called a Baal shaft. It represents the phallus of Baal or Hercules. And from there it gets passed down to America. The Washington Monument is a Baal shaft. And this here is the womb. The Baal shaft is what ejaculates the seed into the rotunda dome, which is the womb, and then out of that, that's what produces the king of the country. And we're going to get into all that later when we get into Mystery Babylon and the Secret Destiny of America. But you have to admit that in this rendition of King Solomon's temple here, where they kill Hiram and take him out and bury him, this was done a long time ago. I don't know how old this picture is, but they were spot on, because look at the structures they put in the back. It's the same structures that we see in all of the popularized cities of the world, like Vatican City and Washington, D.C. today. Here's just more symbolism. These are cuffs to go on a jacket. Tubal-Cain. We know that traces back to Tubal-Cain from Genesis 4. This is another Tubal-Cain. Blue label. We see the Masonic symbol there. These are all different patches for the Masonic religion. We see the pentagram, the five-pointed star. We see the double-headed phoenix, the Rosicrucians, the Red Cross, in memory of Hiram Abiff. We even see some Islamic stuff with the scimitar and the symbol for Allah. Now, if anybody says, well, I don't know, I'm not sure I see this connectivity from Hiram, who built the temple, all the way back to Tubal-Cain, then I would like them to be able to answer me why we see a lot of shrines to Tubal-Cain that are Masonic in origin. Here are two of them. This right here is in a Masonic lodge, and look who it's dedicated to, the great artificer Tubal-Cain. And what's he doing? He's holding a hammer, and he's getting ready to do some work with an anvil on metal right here, because he is the master smith. Same thing here. He's holding a sword because he was a master of creating an edged weapon, and he's holding a hammer because he forged weapons. And so make no mistake, Hiram Abiff, this guy right here, who's the one who designed the pillars. See the two pillars? Do you remember when we were looking at the currency in Spain and how they always wrap the wreath around the pillars? These are the two pillars of Hercules. And basically, Freemasonry recognizes that Hiram Abiff, who built King Solomon's temple, descends all the way down from Tubal-Cain and Cain, because they are the seed of the serpent. Now, we studied Manly Hall in the past. He was a 33rd degree Freemason who wrote the book The Secret Destiny of America and many other books that we've looked at in past lectures. Here's one of his books, The Lost Keys of Masonry and the Legend of Hiram Abiff. And what is it about? The author of Occult Masonry, The Sacred Magic of the Kabbalah, Initiation of the Flame, and the Ways of the Lonely Ones. And what do you see? A pyramid facing up. 1924. So this has been going on. These secret societies have been going on all the way back to Solomon's time. Here's another one of their symbols. What do you see? The six-pointed star, the same one that's on the flag of Israel. We see the two pillars of Hercules. We see the steps going up to the sun with the rays of illumination in the checkered board. And then down here we see the building plans for King Solomon's temple, with the compass in the square and all the different things used to achieve the architectural design. Notice this rendition of Hiram Abiff. What do you notice about him? Number one, it's the right side up, upside down paradigm. It's the as above, so below mentality that comes from all the Hermetic knowledge that goes all the way back to Atlantis. He's carrying the hammer. He has the compass in the square. Notice the six-pointed star on his chest, and then there's a reversal of him. The same guy here is carrying the hammer upside down, the upside down compass and square, and the upside down thing. This is the same thing as Baphomet. If you remember, Baphomet is pointing up to the sun and down to the moon, and he represents the as above, so below. How about the high priestess of the tarot cards? So in Freemasonry, they have tarot cards, which is called cartomancy. It's a form of witchcraft. We've looked at this in some previous lectures. And what do you see sitting here? This is a high priestess. Notice on her head is the same symbol we saw when we looked at the golden calf incident, that when Moses came down from Mount Sinai and all of the Hebrews had made the golden altar. Where did they learn that skill set from? How did they learn to cast an image of a gold image of a bull? They learned it from the Egyptians. The Egyptians learned it from the Babylonians. It all goes back to the Smiths and the seed of the serpent. Notice the two horns with the circle in the middle of it. Same symbol on the priestess's head. And here you see B stands for Boaz, J stands for Jachin. One is white, one is black. That's to represent the checkered floor. And so let's read what some of the Masonic teachings teach about Boaz and Jachin. As with most occult symbols, the Masonic twin pillars conceal multiple layers of meaning, some intended for the profane and others divulge in higher degrees of Freemasonry. However, it is generally accepted that Jachin and Boaz represent the equilibrium between two opposite forces, as above, so below. These were the names of the two pillars cast from brass set upon the porch of King Solomon's temple. They were 18 cubits in height and beautifully ornamented with wreaths of chainwork, nets, and pomegranates. And according to Albert Pike, all of these ideas of the chainwork, the nets, and the pomegranates come from Hindu and Egyptian ideas such as the lotus flower. They go on to say that on top of each pillar was a large bowl or globe. One of the bowls contained fire, the other contained water, because when you study witchcraft and sorcery, they always use the four different elements to achieve the sorcery. They use fire, water, earth, and wind. The celestial globe, originally of fire, surmounting the right-hand column Jachin, symbolizes the divine. The terrestrial globe, made of water, on the left hand, signifies the earthly. That's the divine and the earthly, the union of the two. These two pillars respectively connote also the active and passive expressions of divine energy, the sun and the moon, sulfur and salt, good and bad, light and darkness. This is all about dualism here. Between them is the door leading into the house of God, and standing thus at the gates of the sanctuary are a reminder that Jehovah is both an androgynous and an anthropomorphic deity. Androgynous means the union of male and female. As two parallel columns, they denote the zodiacal signs of Cancer and Capricorn, because they were astrologers. Now the Bible makes it clear that Yahuwah in the Old Testament absolutely forbids astrology, and yet they admit here in their writings that they have these zodiacal signs incorporated in these symbols. These were formerly placed in the chamber of initiation to represent birth and death, the extremes of life. They accordingly signify the summer and winter solstices, now known to Freemasons under the modern appellation of the two St. Johns. Now we know that the summer and winter solstices were taught to mankind by the fallen angels in Genesis 6, as revealed in the book of Enoch. Boaz and Jachin are the names of the two pillars before the principal entrance of Solomon's Kabbalistic temple. In the Kabbalah, these pillars explain all mysteries of antagonism, whether neutral, political, or religious. They elucidate also the procreative struggle between man and woman. For according to the law of nature, that woman must resist the man, and he must entice or overcome her. The active principle seeks the passive principle. The plenum desires the void. The serpent's jaw attracts the serpent's tail. That's the Ouroboros, the snake eating its tail. And in turning about upon itself at the same time, flies and pursues himself. Woman is the creation of man, and universal creation is the bride of the first principle. So we're seeing here that the two pillars represent the as above, so below mentality, and the union of those two, which is what the six-pointed star is. And that's also what we see here with Baphomet. Baphomet represents the same thing. And notice the details of Baphomet. He's a hybrid. He's a human being who's been hybridized with an animal. He's a human being who's a male and female hybrid, a male with a female body. He's also a human being who's been hybridized with fallen angels, and we've already revisited this. This represents the double alpha helix strand and the mixing of the seed of the woman with the seed of the serpent. Now, if you go back and look at things like, if you remember when we were looking at the Process Church, who is a splinter group off of Scientology, and you look at some of their teachings, the Process Church preached the existence of four gods known as Jehovah, Lucifer, Satan, and Christ, and were collectively referred to as the great gods of the universe. The group used a swastika-like symbol as its insignia, which represents the trumpets of the four gods, and the second symbol was the sign of the union, which featured the letter alpha inside of omega sign, representing the intercourse of Lucifer with the female Jehovah. You know, nowhere in Scripture do we see any of this stuff. All of this mythological symbolism, it's all based on Jewish mysticism. It's all based on the Kabbalah. It all goes back through the pagan Canaanites and the mixing of those people with the Hebrews. And this is where all of the secret societies begin and really take off from here. And this is where the Freemasons religion really takes off from here. And one of their primary symbols is the six-pointed star. And we see this in the symbols. The union of the two pillars is said to generate a third pillar, which esoterically represents the union of divine with mankind, as above, so below. But it's not Yahweh, the God of the universe. It's Lucifer, the fallen angel. When the two columns find equilibrium between them, it will signify the union of the Sushumni and the Kundalini. This sacred marriage will create a fire midst to radiate throughout the human body, filling it with divine light. That's the Kundalini serpent that we looked at in previous chapters. The seven chakras of the spinal cord. It is then that humanity will become the third column of the temple wisdom. He or she will become a column formed by the combined forces of strength and beauty. This act forms the lost word in the vibratory system of the soul's physical embodiment. Now, this is reminding me of many of the first chapters we looked at about all of the vibratory issues that we see in the occult system and the New Age system, where they're always trying to change your vibrations and your frequencies of your body so that they can reach this etheric realm into the spirit realm. And so here's a perfect example of the combining of the two. One pillar represents the divine pointing down. The other pillar represents the earthly or humanity pointing up, and the yoking or the union or the henosis of the two of them represent this combination of the perfected man, the occult man. And what do we see? The six-pointed star, the same symbol that's used to place a hex on somebody, the same symbol that is used in witchcraft and sorcery, and the same symbol that's on the flag of Israel today. So how interesting that at one point, you know, America, which according to the Masons is the new Atlantis, according to Bacon, if you remember Bacon's book, The New Atlantis, it has a picture of the hybrid angelic being who's pulling the woman out of darkness. He's talking about the new Atlantis, and we know people like Manly Hall talks about the secret destiny of America, and all these Masons were worshiping the pillars of Gibraltar, the pillars of Hercules. Could these have been the representation of the two pillars of Hercules, and then the destruction of them brought about the one world freedom tower, the as above, so below mentality? Is this really a coincidence? We have to ask ourselves, is it a coincidence, or are we seeing the formation of the New World Order, which is an attempt to bring back the pre-flood world of Atlantis, where the Nephilim fallen hybridized angels ruled the world? And so when you look at the nation of Israel today, you know, a lot of Christians are very protective over the nation of Israel, as they should be, because it's the Holy Land. But it doesn't matter how much occult symbolism you reveal to them, they refuse to believe that there's something going on there. You know, right outside of the Parliament building, what do you see? We've just went through all of this. We see a stone altar with a pyramid on top, with the Masonic logo on the front, and we have the two pillars of Hercules in front of it. Now that we know what the meaning of this is, the same secret societies that were working in the times of Solomon, the Phoenician Canaanites, the seed of the serpent, the ones who've been working all through humanity, they're the same ones who are running the parliament system in Israel. And this is, if you look at this symbol right here, this is it right here. The Freemasons circle, Solomon's Pillar Lodge, number 59. See there, they are in love with Solomon's temple. And here is a picture inside of one of the parliament buildings of all of the Masonic regalia. Here is a picture of an obelisk outside of the parliament building in Israel today. You have a pyramid on top here. You have an obelisk, which is known as a Baal shaft and represents the genitalia of Baal or Hercules. And so when you begin to study the architecture, right, it's the Masons who do all of the buildings. The Masonic religion are the ones who built this structure that sits in modern day Israel today that governs its laws. And you begin to realize that nothing has changed, that the symbolism that once existed is still here today, and the same powers that be are running the show. When you look at the overlap of the symbols, it becomes undeniable if you're intellectually honest with yourself. For example, we now know that this is all occult symbology. We've just been reviewing this to death over the last 4 lectures. Look at this pyramid. We know that they worship Egyptology. What do we see on the dollar bill? We see a pyramid. We've already discussed that the form of the seal of the dollar bill, if you put the upside down triangle on it, is an anagram for Mason. And in those lectures we reviewed, proving that the Masonic religion are the ones who instituted this on the dollar bill. And what is this 6-pointed star? Is the same thing that we see on the flag of Israel. And when you look at this 6-pointed star, what do you notice up here? It's just the Masonic symbol uncovered. It's just the same Masonic symbol, missing a couple of lines that complete it. These are the people. This is the bloodline and the group of people in the religion that goes all the way back through the pagan systems that is moving mankind towards the collapse of Western values, the collapse of Christian values, and the future birth of a one-world system, an electronic digital cashless system, a one-world religion, and eventually the mark of the beast. And when you continue looking at the symbolism, the parliament building, the way they light up the pyramid, the fact that the pyramid has a hole in the center which represents the all-seeing eye. We see all throughout the parliament building all of the symbolism. Here are a bunch of pyramids inside of pyramids in a checkered fashion with 2 big pillars. I mean, it's really just, it's everywhere. And what they're telling us is that these are the master masons, these are the masterminds, this is the Babylonian religion that goes all the way back through antiquity. They're the ones who are running the show. And, the symbols don't lie. And so there is a great deception that is afoot. There is a great master manipulation of humanity that's being put in play right now. The Prince of the Power of the Air has been working on it for millennia. He's finally got humanity ready to receive the hook. And so now the landscape is being paved now and in the years to come to bring about this hybridized Babylonian New World system. And I can only hope and pray that for those of you who have eyes to see and ears to hear, that the Lord will reveal to you the knowledge of the truth so that you do not fall into the last days deception. And so on that note, I hope that you are blessed, and I look forward to the next one, and we'll see you later.